You guys might have to turn it off on yours. Huh?
Good evening, everyone. I'm News 4's David Ushery, and we are so glad you're with us here. As we have the second of several community forums, we're preparing to host the third and final Democratic mayoral debate here on June 16th. And so we here at NBC for New York have been working hard along with our partners, the New York City Campaign Finance Board, along with our partners at Telemundo, Politico, the New York Urban League, and the Citizens Budget Commission. The point of tonight's program is to give you, those of you who are listening and watching us, a chance to join in this conversation and tell us what you want to hear from the mayoral candidates. And we've got a group gathered tonight, all representing various stakeholders in our city, in our community at this very important time. I'm so happy to have me lead this discussion, or actually she will run point on this discussion, and that's News 4's Government Affairs reporter, Melissa Russo. She's been on the campaign trail. We managed to snag her and get her here in studio for this forum. She's also covered a number of these issues in our city for a long time. Also joining us, Madam President, Arva Rice, President and CEO of the New York Urban League. They recently put out a report called The State of Black New York, and there are a lot of issues that we expect to cover tonight as part of this discussion. Ebony Carrington is the Chief Executive Officer of NYC Health and Hospitals Harlem. And just think about all the people working there who've been on the front lines, both as first responders and, of course, the members of that community who are so much in need. Aaliyah Baylor is owner of Make My Cake Bakery and Cafe, a small business owner in this city, and a lot to discuss with us and a lot she wants to hear from the mayoral candidates. Adrian Summers is a New York Urban League Whitney Young Jr. Scholar. He's the handsome guy with that smile that is almost blinding me, man, but keep it coming. I like to see it. He graduated from Bronx High School for Medical Science in 2015. He's also a Fulbright Scholar, probably the closest I'm going to get to one. He taught English in Kenya, and he currently works at Levain Bakery on the Upper West Side, where he is a team leader. So glad you're all with us. Melissa?
Thank you, David. It's so great to be a part of this discussion at this really critical time for New York City. If you're joining us live, you can send your questions or your comments by emailing them to debate@nbcnewyork.com. We're going to try to get to as many of your questions as possible during our short time here together tonight. But before we get started, we would like to invite Arva to say a few words about our partners at the New York Urban League. Arva?
Thank you so much, David and Melissa, for having us here and giving us an opportunity to be part of this vital conversation that we need to have with all of our mayoral candidates. As you heard, I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of the New York Urban League, an over 100-year-old civil rights organization that works in the areas of education, employment, and advocacy. We are one of over 90 member affiliates around the country that are designed to empower communities and change lives. As David mentioned, we recently released our State of Black New York report. And in that report, we talked about how inequality is unacceptable. And particularly for African Americans in the city, where over 52% live on wages that are $50,000 or below. There's many issues that we're looking forward to discussing tonight, including income inequality.
Okay, Arva, thank you. Yes, indeed. The report highlighted a number of issues, many of them faced by all New Yorkers, and then, of course, exacerbated in the Black community. We want to begin with a viewer question. And again, we've been telling you in our on-air broadcast and certainly here, send us your questions. We even have a team now monitoring. We'll try to get them in. We're going to get a number of them in, but keep sending them as we prepare for that primary debate coming up on June 16th. But Caleb Lee sent us an email saying he wants to hear the candidates talk about how they're going to bring the city back from crisis. We know from covering the pandemic how quickly that happens will depend largely on the success of city and state efforts to tackle, for example, issues like vaccine hesitancy. We've had a lot of encouraging news lately on our road to recovery, but we know there's a lot of scar tissue and a lot of work to be done and a lot of recovery yet to be had. So I think, you know what, Ebony, I'll start with you because this intersects with your world in so many ways. Ebony Carrington, CEO of NYC Health and Hospitals Harlem.
Sure. I think that recovery from the pandemic really involves
kind of a multifactorial approach to understand your mental wellness and your ability and capacity to be resilient. You have to know what you've gone through. And so being a trauma-informed mayor is going to be very important, helping folks in New York understand how not only to get the city back open by virtue of their vaccination rates and to offset their hesitancy, but also to make sure that as we return to work and to school, that we remain whole, and that our mental health is something that we don't take for granted or compromise. Now, directly to your question around vaccine hesitancy, we've been seeing in Manhattan County a very slow uptake of people of color being inoculated. And we at Harlem Hospital remain very committed to making sure that there is accessible vaccine, that there are no obstacles to accessing care, but there are real issues that we have to continue to address. We've had kind of a flurry of information come out around vaccine efficacy and safety, but we have to continue to have that conversation. These vaccines are safe. They do make sure that you remain free of severe illness, definitely that it prevents death. And so that's the key takeaway that everyone has to appreciate. While there may be some questions around even which vaccine you should take, it's not optional not to get vaccinated if we want to restore normalcy to the city of New York. And for people of color, we have so much to offset, and that's just going to come by having routine and consistent conversations, rooting ourselves in the science, and making sure that you have credible messengers and people that you trust, like those that are on the call today, that have been vaccinated and demonstrated their commitment to the same and to public health.
Ebony, I'd love to follow up if I can. You mentioned, I think oftentimes when we hear about issues with getting Black New Yorkers vaccinated, it's framed as if there's a mistrust of vaccines. And of course, that is an issue. We understand the reasons throughout history why that might be the case. But as you mentioned, there are other obstacles beyond mistrust, issues like availability of vaccine sites, distribution, accessibility, even to public transit, weekend access for working folks who may not be able to take a day off from work to get vaccinated or to recover from the side effects. I'm asking because by the time the next mayor takes over, the specific vaccine issue may not be in play anymore, but what lessons overall do you think the next mayor needs to take away from the weaknesses that COVID really laid bare in our city?
So I'd like to partner with Arva on this because we talk so often about how our agencies intersect and kind of the cross-section of the social advocacy that the Urban League has and what we do and trusting the science within my business. What I would say is the next mayor has to make sure they understand what people's challenges are. What we saw with the vaccine distribution was that the tech platforms that were the sole source of distribution very early for the first 2 weeks were very rate limiting for people of color. And I would say for all people who live below the socioeconomic line, the poverty line. So when you don't have broadband internet, you cannot be on sites that require, complicated tech platforms. You have to make sure that you understand what challenges people have around health and wellness. And it's not just access. It has to do with the cost of co-payments. It has to do with paid time off, because sometimes people have to make a choice between a paycheck and going to their doctor's appointment. Making sure that their children are vaccinated and that they can go to school are issues that we have and we struggle with. So I think health literacy is a challenge for the next mayor, making sure that the accessible health services that we do have, especially at the public hospital system, they're readily available, but how do we get people to appreciate them? How do we get the information out? How do we make sure that we have virtually competent kind of educational framework? There are many people who have limited English proficiency in New York, and most of our materials are in English. We saw a tech divide. We saw a language divide. We saw the ability for people not to understand the importance of their health compliance. So we know that health literacy is important. So the next mayor has really a panacea of ways to really improve and demonstrate some more achievement in the healthcare sector.
Arva, why don't you weigh in then? Because you'd already started talking about the digital divide in the State of Black New York report, and we encourage anyone who wants to go online and download that if they're serious about this issue to understand some of these issues. But already a digital divide, the pandemic seems to exacerbate that with these health implications.
Absolutely. This pandemic really highlighted the haves and the have-nots. Very early in the epidemic, there were commercials that came out that said, we're all in this together. And they showed wonderful, well-meaning individuals who are sitting in their homes on Long Island in their beautiful kitchens and sitting with their families. And they were portraying this idea that we were all in this together. Well, the fact is that there were some New Yorkers who still had to go to work. There were some New Yorkers who never were quickly make that transition of being at home. And so it is this divide that was underscored by COVID. And as Ebony already mentioned, so many of our young people did not have devices in order to do their homework. So many of our young people still don't have access to broadband. And so when you talk about a year from now, there are going to be many who have already gotten their vaccine. There'll be many who are already enrolled back in school. And so it's important for us to remember that those folks who were left behind during the COVID epidemic are going to need supports, are going to need additional supports for not only for the next 3 months, but for the next 6 months and beyond.
Let me ask Aaliyah, you to weigh in, and we're going to talk about small business in a moment. But just as you listen to this, as a New Yorker, as someone of the community, your thoughts on how the city navigated it. What could have been done better? And to Melissa's point, what are you expecting from the next mayor to improve upon? What lessons could be learned?
Good evening. One of the things that, as I listen to it, I feel like there's certain things that I've not interacted with directly, but indirectly with whether my business and my staff, myself, family, friends, and other business owners. Some of the things that could have been done. We can go back and talk about that, but it's more of what will this be a whole new team at the government from the administrators who will be facilitating policies. And I don't want them to look back at I want them to look at the things that were done well and move on that. As far as the workforce and different things of what was essential workers were people that, like myself, my business was still open and I had very low response of being able to hire or maintain. And a lot of that had to do with, one, the safety of individuals coming out. But I feel that the person that comes in and the people that come in, because there's city council and everyone that's coming in, has to address the issues from the home. Hiring is going to be a big issue because so many people have to stay home. And if vaccines become an issue where we're not feeling confident to go out and get vaccinated, there has to be a different push. There has to be more faces like myself and others who are supporting the vaccination. And if they're not feeling like they're going to be ostracized and not be able to come back into the workforce or be able to go into the schools. I really hope that the administration is empathetic to those who don't feel like the process has been on their side. So if they're stepping into going back into school and going back into the workforce, what support will they have? And that has to be done in a way that does not feel like someone doesn't have a voice.
Melissa, you want to weigh in? And I just want to say that we're all used to these team meetings. So Melissa and I are in the same building, but we're not next to each other. So we're just going to be a little awkward as we kind of work everyone into the conversation. But go ahead, Melissa.
I'd like to come back to something that Ebony brought up, which is the subject of mental health, because I think it's a huge piece of the COVID recovery. It's an issue I've been interested in. One of the first investigative stories I did 20 years ago was about the uneven access in New York to mental health services and how it disproportionately disadvantages communities of color. And I think that Black New Yorkers are at higher risk of slipping through the cracks of a mental health system that's just been underdeveloped. There are issues of access. The cost of treatment has proven to be a stretch for Black families. Reimbursements from health insurance can be way too small. It's fair that people want a therapist who looks like them and their families, and there aren't as many as we would like to see. And then there's, of course, the stigma that presents itself around mental illness. I'm wondering what you think the next mayor needs to do, and how much work the next mayor needs to do to build upon Mayor de Blasio and his wife Chirlane McCray's efforts to tackle these issues. And I should probably note, with some mixed reviews.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Say that the simple fact that the Thrive Initiative has been created, the fact that mental health was highlighted and punctuated by the administration is very appropriate and very thoughtful. What we need to figure out in the next administration is how to operationalize mental health in a way that makes it accessible, but also, Melissa, really destigmatizes mental health in communities of color. One of the biggest oppositional factors that we see are that people are embarrassed to access mental health services. They perceive it to be weak. And really, within communities of color, there have been many years of stigmatization around mental health, around trauma, PTSD. And right now, we all need to understand the nation is in a post-traumatic state. And what we really have to try to accomplish is conciliation. We've got to come together. We have to make sure that people are supportive. What I will offer you is that mental health services are there. Folks have to know what to ask for. They have to maintain their treatment regimen. They have to have supportive families that understand medication compliance. And really, across many aspects of the political sector, we have to have regulation and law that allows for people to be mentally ill just as they do other disabilities. So these platforms are large, they're broad ranging, but I would say that heightening everyone's awareness to the ability to get therapeutic services, to be okay not being okay, and to talk about that more freely and openly is really where we should focus our attention.
And Arva, I saw in your recent report that you talk about the disparities in discipline in schools, which can sometimes come about as a result of untreated mental health issues for children. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you so much for bringing that up. What may look like anger in one child is really they're letting you know that they're depressed. They're letting them know that they're having some troubles adjusting in the classroom. And one of the things that we would ask for the mayor to consider is having a social worker in every single New York City public school. If we can have police officers, then we can have social workers. As Ebony just mentioned, we are all coming out of trauma. And there's so many of our young people who buried, who had and lost aunts and uncles and grandparents and were not able to bury them. They were not able to be with them in their final hours. And so they were not able to have that closing, to have that closure that they so needed. And so we, as a grieving city particularly, need to be able to have access to MSWs in every single school building. And that's one of the things that we'll definitely ask for and push with our incoming mayor. The other issue that goes with mental health issues in the African-American community is too often it bumps into our criminal justice system. So there's individuals that are called in to deal with the police issue, and really it's a member of their family, a member of the community who just has mental health issues, and before you know it, we're talking about this person becoming a hashtag. So I think it's extremely important for us to focus in on mental health going forward.
This may be a moment to bring in the one who's most recently in the New York City school system, and that's the one with the $1 million smile. With all due respect to our panel there, the graduate in 2015, Adrian. And you heard that discussion there, and I kind of want to hear about your experiences there. That may dovetail us into education. But before that, can you just tell me a little bit about how you're seeing this city right now in your eyes? A young man, a young Black man. Tell us, we know you're working on the Upper West Side, where you're living, the COVID experience, some of these issues that you hear, and what you need to hear from the next mayor. Just give us a look at the world from your eyes right now.
Well, right now, I'm in the Bronx, New York. And like you said, I'm commuting to the Upper West Side to work. But a lot of my attention and focus has been on my little cousin, Cameron. He just started his first year of high school, and it's been pretty depressing and sad to see just how he has handled the pandemic, specifically pandemic school, as he likes to call it. And it really just hurts my feelings as someone who is interested in education to hear him ask me, what's the point of logging on and going to school That makes me really sad. And so I'm really hoping that the next mayoral administration can really, really make sure that mental health is part of their academic recovery plan. And I really hope that we can just think bigger in terms of staffing, and making sure, like Arva said, we have a social worker in every school, a therapist in every school, and possibly making sure that our schools transform into something beyond just like a place to turn in homework, but maybe just something that's like a community hub that has like health clinics available inside, art programs. Because when I went to high school, we went through the metal detector every day. You put all your metal through the scanner, and you went to school and you went home. There were not a lot of programs after school. They didn't have any art programs. And school was kind of boring for me. And so I can only imagine what it's like for for him to have to go to school and have to be online. You don't even get to be in person. That's a lot. So that's a little bit about how I've been seeing the city right now. Pretty sad to see my cousin go through that.
I know Mayor de Blasio has definitely talked about developing community schools. Arva, you might be in a position to talk a little bit about how that has worked out. But I should throw out there that just today, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a new Office of Community Mental Health, building upon their prior issues with Thrive. And the goal of that is to encourage students to speak to trusted adults in schools. And this is something we're hearing a lot of on the campaign trail now. The candidates talking about getting kids to, to speak up when they need help. So I would love to hear from Arva on the community schools issue, and also from Adrian on whether or not that's something that students are receptive to. Maybe we could start with Arva.
Sure. When we talk about community schools, we're basically talking about schools that have after-school programming, often have healthcare providers, and are able to reach the cumulative needs of a young person, including being able to have social workers, which we've already spoken about. The other program that I'm a big fan of, because I used to work in them, are Beacon centers. And Beacons are schools that are open, 360 days a year, and provide programming for young people all the way from elementary school all the way up to serving their children and their families. And so I'm also a big fan of the Beacon School movement. And so I think that it's important for us to be able to provide those services so that young people have positive places in order to spend their after school and their weekend time, that they have opportunities for contribution, so that they're volunteering, serving as junior counselors in training. And so those opportunities are really important. And we know that folks that are in their 40s, 50s, all the way up to their 80s have experiences where they were able to do other things in classrooms. But unfortunately, Adrian and his younger cousin are growing up when they're not having those opportunities that are open to them. And so we need to return to providing that support, that wraparound, that arm around our communities, particularly at this time.
How do you think, just before we move to Adrian, Arva, how do you think we can press our mayoral candidates to get answers about how they would also achieve excellence in schools like this? Because it's easy to say we're going to bring all these services into schools, we're going to make them like a second home, we're going to make them family-based, we're going to extend the hours. But how do we know, and how do we hold these candidates accountable? How do we know that they're going to create schools that are high-performing?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question. And I think it's about encouraging people to show their plans. A number of the existing candidates do have things that they put on their websites, but for asking them specifically about their plans, asking them how they see their relationship is going to be with their chancellor or the next incoming chancellor, asking them for some specifics around that, asking about how they plan on partnering with corporations. As we all know, after George Floyd, there were so many corporations who were rushing to issue their statement saying that they believe that racism was wrong. Yes, that's good. We appreciate that. We appreciate that statement. But so now what are you going to do about it, right? What schools are you going to adopt? What internships are you going to create? What bridges are you going to build between your corporation and some of these communities that are so in need? It's interesting if you go to outside of the country, but what can you do for young people in Brownsville and Bed-Stuy and the South Bronx in order to bring those individuals into your corporation? So I think that's what we need to ask for, is what's their concrete plan? How are you planning on using the different individual sectors of New York City in order to spur this recovery?
Mm-hmm. And Adrian, how will you be judging the candidates, and are you paying attention to what they're talking about? We have heard some of them bringing up trauma on the campaign trail. It's the first mayor's race I remember hearing that come up fairly regularly. How will you judge the candidates' positions on this?
That's a great question. I honestly am currently comparing a lot of what I'm seeing to what I experienced when I was in Kenya just a year ago and how things are working over there, which is probably weird to think to say, but specifically in regards to like education, specifically because I'm really big on education, it's so fascinating to leave a town, a country that I was in which the classrooms were focused on like facilitating like healing, and the schools themselves were like, how do you say, like community hubs. Like the students went there to get food for their family. They got their water for the week from their family. It had a partnership with the hospital around the corner. It's just so fascinating to see what that can be like when a school really is a community hub. And part of my job there was to try to get after school programs started up and functioning for the students. And so to come back and see and be reminded that's not necessarily what the case is for schools over here, and to see it kind of regress online was pretty jarring. So I think I would just have to compare like what I see in the classroom to what I know works elsewhere. That's sort of how I think I'll be judging based on what I know works.
Mm-hmm. Ebony, let's bring you in here. I think you have something to say.
I think we have to also look at the city as we do all other areas of business, and look at it from a data-driven perspective. A good amount of the success or the perceived success of all the elected officials during the pandemic was their ability to move the numbers and to speak a narrative that was driven from data. And one of the ways to hold folks accountable, both in the school system and in really any other aspect of the city, would be to metricize the work that they're doing, to figure out what we are doing well, how we can improve it, by when and by how much. And that is something that can be reported out frequently. And in that way, New Yorkers have a very good and accountable system, and they're able to appreciate and understand progress or regression in a very objective manner.
I want to ask Aaliyah, we lost her for a moment, but I do want to, and we can go back to that subject matter, but there's so much ground to cover. I want to take a moment with small business, especially as you try to emerge, Aaliyah, from this pandemic. And I know you've had a number of issues that you want to make sure the candidates are addressing. And those are the challenges that you face as a small business owner, your landlord, your lender. Paint a picture for us and and let us know what you're listening for when these candidates are out on the trail.
One of the things that, in this past year, I was already in the process of building out a new location. One of the issues was, of course, things got shut down. Once I started to get into the groove of getting the space built out, I find that there were certain things that were not COVID related that was holding up the process. And it became, oh, this is the normalcy. This is how long it takes. This is what it does. So you have to just wait it out. Literally, it was one inspection that took customarily 5 months to get noticed. And there's not much you can say to your landlord or your lender at that very moment that speaks to, well, this is what I'm being told. Of course, they understand, but there's really no pause on the expectancy to pay rent. And then there's also major delays. So one of the things that I want the mayor and the administration to focus on is the things that were already disarray in the city and getting someone to get to that process of opening. I want them to be able to look at that, because there's already so many other obstacles right now with securing the funding, negotiating with the landlords. And I want to come back to that with the negotiating the landlords, but in regards to having the basic processes of inspections, the DOB, the FDNY, those different departments that are the final say on an individual getting the business open. I really want them to look at those agencies and dissect them and find out why those things do take as long as they do.
You're
Now,
saying the bureaucracy, Aaliyah, the bureaucracy. We heard that from business owners in the Asian American community as well in our forum. The bureaucracy, especially trying to emerge from this pandemic, there need to be some concrete steps taken by the next mayor.
it definitely has to be there. It's you know, these are things that you don't know as a business owner beforehand. You don't know that certain things are going to take a period of time. And I'm a seasoned business owner. Our family is celebrating 25 years as a brick and mortar, and our businesses have been supported and have been housed in Harlem. And I don't know if it's like that in Brooklyn. I don't know if it's like that in Queens. I don't know those things. I just know the process that has been taking place in my community, and I wanted to be able to see that change, because it has been different hiccups along the line with just getting the ability to get through. And I mean, for myself, I've called in favors just to make things happen. And I don't think they were huge favors. It was just, hey, can you help me make phone calls? It wasn't like I knew someone particularly that can push go. It was, can you help me? Can you back me up on this? And it was this process that we're now, I mean, literally since November, we're now going to be able to be close to opening up. And I think, how brave am I to be opening up a business during the pandemic when funding and those things are not at the abundance. They weren't there always for me just to grab. I want the administration to be able to fix those things that are not they've been highlighted. They talked about minorities, Blacks in particular, not being able to get funding without hassle. Landlords not always being in a position to be able to negotiate or get businesses in that they feel are viable businesses. And that's something that I'm concerned about with Harlem. As I stated, that's where I live. This is what I know. Going on another wave of gentrification. There's going to be a lot of storefronts. There's been a lot of development that still have been going on, and I want to be able to make sure that there is a voice. Someone is paying attention to the communities that are allowing development to go on, and be able to make sure that the businesses that come about, like myself, we have a fair share of being able to step into those storefronts and be able to survive, not just for the rents or pandemic, but just long haul. And I'm concerned that is going to be an issue where there's going to be a lot of low rates on rents, and some of us will not be at the table to hear those conversations and be able to partake in that.
Melissa, you want to weigh in or another subject?
Sure. I've been thinking a lot about how we have so many candidates in this race to keep track of. I think it's hard for the voters. I'm hearing a lot of voters saying they're feeling a little overwhelmed by the sheer number of Democrats in this race. They're trying to sort it all out. I always try, whenever possible, out on the campaign trail, to stop even just for a few minutes, if I can, to speak to voters about what they care about, how the candidates' positions are resonating with them. And one thing I've heard a lot of concern about, no surprise, in some neighborhoods is about public safety. Rising crime, the gun violence that is up more than 200% in certain neighborhoods. And many of the voters that I've been speaking to have said that they really do not want to see a reduction in police resources in their communities. And there seems to be a split in this Democratic field between the candidates who want to deploy more police, refund the police, and restore the anti-crime unit, and those who are more focused on police misconduct and diverting resources from the NYPD to the community for anti-violence programs and some more grassroots efforts at tackling violence. Which crime strategies do you think are resonating in the neighborhoods that are confronting violence? And I guess this is a question that we'd love to hear from all of you about. Let's start with Adrian.
I would say in my community specifically, I don't know that the NYPD have made that much of a difference in this community in years past since I've been here. I feel like I still hear gunshots at night. I'm still scared to wake up at 5 a.m. every morning and go on the trains at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I don't know if deploying more will do anything, because I feel like the amount that we've had right now haven't really made a huge difference to me specifically. And in regards to like what it would look like to shift funding from them to a different program, I'm curious to see what that might look like. I'm interested. I don't really know what it would look like, but I'm curious. I would be curious to hear from the candidates like what ideas they have surrounding that, because right now I don't feel very safe in my community, but I feel like we do have a pretty big NYPD presence on my block, and I feel like I'm still not safe, so I don't really know what they're doing and what increasing their presence would do. So what would it look like if we shift things around? I don't know.
One of the programs that I've heard some candidates reference is a hospital-based anti-violence program where gunshot victims who could potentially be likely to retaliate for that shooting are approached in the hospital in what's considered to be a vulnerable moment. I think, Ebene, maybe you have a perspective on this and how effective this and any other programs you might be familiar with are.
I heard Adrian say he didn't know how well the programs work, because I'd love to speak to that. We participate in a program. It's a violence interruption program, and it's called Guns Down, Life Up. And we partner with peer resource groups that are in our community, Street Corner Resources, Harlem Mother Save. There are many different gun violence and anti-violence groups that we work with that do come into the hospital very shortly after a shooting. They're in many cases gang members or ex-gang members. They have the ability to meet both the victim and their families and the potential retaliatory entities where they are. They have real conversations. They work with the police, but they are very effective. They are credible, and they have the ability to really de-escalate situations in ways that people who are formally trained haven't been able to demonstrate. So what I will say is I have seen people come back and say, I was the one who shot someone. Don't do that. Don't end up in jail. Here are the implications of your actions. And so seeing gun violence as an offshoot of public health and as a vital component of what we have to do to talk about wellness is absolutely necessary. And there are programs in place, and they do work. They need further funding, further training, integration with the police, integration with our first responders, so that the continuum of care for an individual that may be in need is a little bit more solid. So I would say that that is a strategy that I've seen work, and that could be further developed for ongoing public safety.
Arva, do you think that that's those ideas like that are what are resonating with voters right now when it comes to looking at how the candidates plan to tackle rising crime?
Oh, Arva, I think you're muted.
I hear you.
We have a mute. Yeah.
The issue of the police is a big one, and it's a subject that I have been spending an awful lot of time with as a co-chair of the Reform and Reimagine Task Force. And we were responsible for working with community members and the NYPD to submit a plan to the governor to talk about how we could reimagine policing. And for a lot of the who have been doing this work for a really long time, they wanted those efforts to go even further. So I think that what Adrian said was just, I mean, it's just so on the money. The fact is that people want to feel safe. They want to feel safe in their own community. So they want to make sure that they're not going to be the victim of other people, causing them harm. But they also want to make sure that the police are not the people that are causing them harm. And so if people can figure out how to police in the suburbs, we should be able to figure out how to police in the city as well. We want a police commissioner who can hear us when we say we want to be safe. That does not mean that we need another 1,000 police officers to be recruited. We want to feel safe, right? So how do you make that happen? How do you partner together? How do you get guns off the streets? How do you make sure that people who commit crimes have the appropriate sentence that is given to them, whether it's on the police or whether it's on the civilian side? But we just want to make sure that we have that folks that are accountable to our communities.
Yeah, I'd like to hear Leah on that, if I could, just because not only as a resident, but a business owner, right? Because you have a calculus of customers have to feel safe, they have to, and you want to feel safe, and then the overall reckoning of police in the city. Give me your take on that and Melissa's question.
I like that I hear that there's programs that are addressing individuals who are out to do harm, and to be able to have them be able to have some level of remorse and just finding an option out of that. I think a lot of people have been forced to crime of recent because they have not been able to work. It's been desperate times, and there has to be, for myself as a business owner who closes late, who that is taking cash, and customers who are walking in the door. I don't want to go back and see police that are not community oriented, that are not engaging, that are just there in a way that is more intimidating. I really hope that the administration really looks at individual departments, because I know it starts in that area, how they're addressing their officers before they go out. They should not feel as if one community, one block versus another block is more of aggressive than another. I really hope to see what I saw when I was young, getting to know the police and the police getting to know us. It seems so old-fashioned to some when I've said that. They were like, oh, that's just not the way that is done anymore. I think that way was very effective. That way was very reliable. They knew the businesses, they knew the community. So I don't want to see what I saw a few administrations back, because it was not a very healthy way of how the onset of police were addressing the communities that I live in and that I know of.
Mm-hmm. We just got a question in related to the subject of diverting resources from the NYPD elsewhere. Michelle has written in and she's asking, should the school safety division stay within the NYPD or move to the DOE? That's something she's considering as she looks at these mayoral candidates. Mm-hmm. Arva, do you want to take a stab?
Sure. That's a challenging one because we want to look at what type of benefits those actual workers receive at NYPD versus at the Department of Education. We want to make sure that our schools are depoliced. Adrian talked about walking into school and having to empty out his pockets in order to walk into a classroom, walk into a metal detector every day. What does that say to a young person? What does it say about their worth and where it is that we're projecting that we see them going into the future? So I think that it's important for us to demilitarize the police, and I think it's important for us to depolice schools. And so we move them one more towards educated and the other one to the business of safety, and the business of safety no matter what zip code that you live in.
Melissa, you've done a lot of reporting on homelessness in the city through the years, and we've got some things that have been exacerbated again in the pandemic. I know we got some viewer-related questions relative to some of the shelters. Wonder if you wanted to ask our guests something along those lines, because that's obviously something for the next mayor.
I mean, there are a couple of issues, right? There are the single homeless adults who are on the street in need of treatment. And then there are families who are living in shelters at record numbers. We got a question today from a New York City voter named Malika, and she asks, what can be done to help residents like myself who are currently in hotels due to COVID-19 protocols at shelters for those in need of emergency housing, so residents don't have to return to incompassionate congregate settings? Mm-hmm. Ebony, do you want to take a stab?
I do. Aspects of homelessness are just one of the many different social determinants of health that we study, not only in public health but across the nation. And it has everything to do with safe discharge, with where people can thrive and where they can have a therapeutic setting. And what this individual who reached out in the hotel was basically sharing is that where I'm going to go, I won't feel well, nor will I feel healthy. And that's where supportive housing is an offshoot of public health and of ongoing wellness. I think the next mayor has to figure out the issue of homelessness, but also where do people go thereafter? How do we transition people back into society? How do we actually, again, and I want to keep using these words, stigma, how do we destigmatize homelessness more as a component of their current demographic and not as a character trait that people own? Because with that comes so many biases. So I would offer that supportive housing is a real platform for the next mayor. The ability to integrate the homeless population into other vocational programs is important, and making sure that reintegration or re-entry into society, both from homeless shelters and from the social justice setting. So post-incarceration is important in New York. So I just offer that really looking at our marginalized populations in the city is going to be a real big component to whoever leads it in the future. And homelessness is one of those biggest to tackle.
Go ahead, Adrian.
Thank you. I wanted to add that at my job, I mean, I work on the Upper West Side, like I said, and I think about every day, like 2 to 3 times a day, we have a homeless person come to our store and, want food or are engaging with our customers and are asking them to buy them something to eat. And it's gotten to a point where I'm no longer allowed to even try to give them like a free cup of coffee or a free cookie or something, because more people come back. And I feel like a really big thing that I would like to see happen is more information on what we can do when we identify people who need help, and where we can redirect them, or who we can call to get them help, because I don't feel comfortable calling the police. And oftentimes, like when they become a bit more combative or aggressive, like people go, "Oh, just call the police," and I'm like, I don't know about you, but I'm not calling the police right now on people. So I don't know who to call. I don't know what resources I can utilize to help them get where they need to be, or at least like not like transgressing against customers.
The city often encourages New Yorkers to call 311, and they can be connected.
They don't answer the phone.
They don't answer the phone. Well,
that's okay.
That's not good. But to be connected to an outreach team. And one thing that the de Blasio administration has been doing is to keep a by name list of street homeless New Yorkers, so they can try to visit them repeatedly on the street. And I wonder, Ebony, you did mention supportive housing, but what else do you think you need to hear from the candidates about what they would do for the most shelter-resistant street homeless people, meaning those who are really most resistant to coming indoors?
I think it would be to find a way to meet the demand of what they are requesting or what they require exactly where they are. So a lot more drop-in centers. I think it's important to speak to people. Very often we're problem solving on behalf of what we think a causal factor is, or what the root cause of an issue is. And we've not reached out to talk to the folks who would partake in the services. And I think we saw some of that even when it became very, very cold and people were reluctant to go inside because of the safety of shelters. So opening more didn't seem to be the strategy. What I would say we have to look at is, what are people looking for? What are the minimum basic needs that they require? How do we make sure that they can take a shower? How do we ensure that they can get their medication refilled? In the event that they need a short and trauma-informed episode, how do we make that accessible to them? How do we get them naloxone if they need, so that they're not overdosing? The real strategy of addressing people in the street is to figure out what they need and then supply that, as opposed to creating and crafting programs that are either underutilized or that don't actually meet the need. So that's what I would offer.
Yes, this is an issue that I find voters bring up all the time. And I think it's, voters are really compassionate about the homeless. They want them to get help, and they also don't want their neighborhoods overrun with quality of life issues that can be also very problematic.
Absolutely. I think that New York City, for any mayor that I would vote for, would need to have a very concrete housing plan. Over the course of the last few decades, the city has become more and more unreasonable. It's been, there's the individual who talked about how the rent was too damn high. And so there was the reason why that got that traction was because this city is becoming increasingly more expensive to live in. And so we need a housing plan where developers have to build affordable housing, not within, blocks and blocks and miles of where they're able to put in luxury housing, but that the housing that the housing that they're putting in, there's also affordable housing within that same neighborhood, within a few blocks of where they put in that building. I think it's in New York City, affordable housing is we're at a crisis situation. We're grateful for the governor for putting the rent moratoriums, but the fact is when those lapse, we're going to have a housing crisis in the city that is probably going to be equal to as we had the COVID crisis. And so I think that is something that we absolutely have to press any mayoral candidate to talk about, is how they're going to deal with when the rent moratoriums expire, and also the affordable housing crisis that's just around the corner.
Melissa? And just one other thing, I think we really have to also talk about food insecurity when we talk about homelessness. We in Harlem live in a food desert where access to fresh produce, besides, a very predatorily high-priced location, is not accessible to us. And so when you talk about what homeless people use the healthcare system for inappropriately, it's for food and warmth. And so the ability to get them on demand, quality and respectful food, and somewhere where they can stay warm or cool, dependent upon the season, I think is just a strategy that we have to start seeing rapidly, and that it proliferates really very quickly, especially during the summer months. But I would say food insecurity remains an issue in New York that both we see in our schools as well as in our homeless population, and a very sound strategy from whoever leads the city would be appropriate.
Wow, that's a good point. We've actually covered a lot of ground, and if, a candidate should be listening, because we've come up with a lot of the questions that need to be addressed or answered. But I want to give all of you a chance to weigh in on this as we get close to wrapping up. And this is from Carlos, who's been listening. And he says, much is being done to disenfranchise our vote, in his words. Yet I worry that many people feel or believe that their vote doesn't matter. Is low voter participation in Black and brown communities a concern for the upcoming election? What are the strategies needed to increase voter participation? And I do think that this is every one of you, from your perspective, can weigh in on, and Melissa has covered this. So, Arva, I'll start with you as the institutional head. Is this a concern? What are you doing? We're working with you in partner. We're trying to prepare for these debates, but how worried are you about it, and what's being done?
Sure. I think that it's incredibly important for us to be involved and engaged with this upcoming election. I do think that people have not turned their attention to it to the degree that they should. But the fact is that, voting matters, and it makes an incredible change. We just saw how Stacey Abrams and the work that she did in the state of Georgia has literally, changed the nature of our politics right now. So that being able to turn Georgia blue has had a huge impact on what we're able to achieve and accomplish as a country. And so, voting matters. And so that's the message that we're going to be bringing out to our communities, working in conjunction with our young professionals, working in conjunction with our membership, with our great partners at the NAACP, at 100 Black Men, at NAN. It's just really organizing in order to get individual community members to understand the connection. I once hosted an event for our young professionals right here in this living room, and we talked about the importance of voting. And at that time, Assembly Member Keith Wright talked about how there was decisions during the Giuliani administration that they sold off a lot of city properties. And so as a result of the loss of those city properties, there's buildings that now go up, developments that go up, and they don't have to go through something called the ULERP process. And so the community members don't always hear what's going on. And so as a result of that, housing started to go up more and more in Harlem. And so Keith Wright was talking about how, because of the vote that happened, and the mayor that was selected, there was a difference in housing policy. And now for the young people sitting in my living room at that point in time, it was more expensive for them to have their rent. All of a sudden it hits and the light bulb goes on, and they say, this is the importance of voting. And I think that that's what it's about. It's just finding that concrete issue that connects with the heart and the mind of the voters so that they can understand why voting matters.
Let me go to Adrian on that. How energized are voters in your social circles, your age group, your demographic? What is your sense?
To be honest, I haven't heard anyone my age talk about the mayoral election. But what I will say is that whenever a candidate for any kind of election steps into the shade room on Instagram, which is like a big, like, I don't know how many followers, they have like millions of followers, all my age, mostly people of color. When a candidate steps into the shade room and does an interview and lays out their platform and just discusses the election, we get engaged. And then we start hashtagging and we start sharing and we start leaving comments. So I feel like, though I haven't seen much engagement from my peers, I know that if like the candidates were to utilize social media in that way, meet us where we're at, which is Twitter and Instagram, specifically the Shade Room, and did an interview. Because I know like when Joe Biden and Kamala did an interview, we got engaged, we started chatting, we started sharing the video. So if y'all step into the Shade Room and do an interview, I could promise you you'll get a lot more engagement from people my age or younger.
That's a good point. Aaliyah, your sense of engagement with your customer base, your small business owners, how concerned are you about turnout?
I mean, I'm very concerned, and to Adrian's point, there has to be a different approach on how you're going to reach the masses, and not everyone. There's so many people on this, that's running. They have to have a bigger voice in areas that are going to get people motivated, but not just motivated just to see your name. Yes, definitely Shade Room has a platform, but that Bolo Alert and a couple of other platforms. What I've seen is what I like to be able to see. My daughter is 20 years old and she's a criminology major. And I was telling her how important it is to be able to get involved in every aspect of everyone that is running. Her core base, her friends, is key to being able to see this city revitalize. Our small businesses, we're part of that, but we need to be able to make sure that the younger people are part of this process and they don't lose the momentum because it's not a presidential race. They have to be able to get involved. I've talked to my customers and a lot of them don't really know who is doing what. I mean, I've paid attention. I am definitely interested. That's why this evening was so important in engagement of this conversation. So I really hope that that there's a lot more push in the community and in different, more unique ways to be able to have their agenda heard.
Ebony, so many health policy decisions are made, at the city and state level. Your sense of how those who are serviced by the health and hospital corporations, the Harlem Health and Hospital Corporations, understand that and their sense of engagement?
I think, obviously, I think my agency is very attuned politically to what's happening in the city and the state, and are participatory in advocacy efforts. So very recently, our entire system participated in White Coats for Black Lives. I think that shows a commitment to our patient base and to the ongoing movement and progress of our country. What our doctors are committed to doing are to participate in any endeavor that's going to help our community. So we participated in the census very recently. They've taken a commitment to have a conversation with people to offset vaccine, let's just say. And I see the same thing dovetailing into the election. Where there's will, the people who work within our system, both the entire public hospital system, but specifically at Harlem Hospital, they'll talk to their patients, because who wins this election will really have a lot to do with our ongoing future, the things that our children will need for their success are in the hands of this next mayor. And so we have to have the right conversations as healthcare professionals with our patients to make sure that they know that their reimbursement, the way that we get our funding, the way that their districts are separated, it has everything to do with voting. So if they saw schools open, that's because voting matters. If they saw the vaccine uptake, voting matters. Small businesses opening up, the curfews being lifted, it's because voting matters. And the current federal administration committed something to us that they're actually making good on. And so that's what I would offer people that feel that their vote doesn't count. What's the alternative? To sit complicit and let someone create a narrative for you or to be participatory within it. And the healthcare system and the public hospital system stands very ready and committed to participate in that.
Well, nobody covers this campaign like a blanket more than Melissa Russo and these issues. So I saved some time for you, Melissa, to give your sense, being on the campaign trail, your sense of what's animating the voters or not, the engagement. And then when you share those, you can then tee us up to an important issue, which is ranked choice voting, and you've been reporting on that. So go ahead.
Yeah, ranked choice voting is very new to New York City, and a lot of voters really don't know what to expect. I think it's a great place to wrap up our conversation around the importance of voting. I think you all had amazing insight. And so I do want to talk about the city's new voting system, because I think it's important. I don't want voters to feel like they don't understand what they're going to confront when they get into the voting booth, and so maybe avoid voting. When you vote in the race for New York City mayor, it's going to be different this time. For starters, just a reminder, the primaries are coming up a lot sooner than people at home might think. They're on June 22nd. And as I just mentioned, you're going to see some very big changes in the way you cast your ballot.
New York City has a new voting system that lets voters say more about their preferences. It's called ranked choice voting, and here's how it works. As always, you pick your first choice, but what's different now? You can also list your second choice, third choice, even your fourth and fifth choices. After the polls close, round one begins. Voters' first place choices are tallied. If one candidate wins more than 50% of the first place votes, they win. It's over. But if no candidate gets a true majority, then the candidate in last place is eliminated, and voters who had put that losing candidate first have their second choices counted instead, and then added to the totals. The process continues in rounds until someone gets over 50%. The new system spares taxpayers the cost of holding a second runoff election in crowded races when votes are split too many ways to have a clear winner. Some say it'll force politicians to be less divisive and work harder for broader appeal. Because while a candidate may not be every voter's first choice, being some voters' second or third choice could come in handy.
And for more information about ranked choice voting and about voting in general, the New York City Campaign Finance Board has a lot of online resources. You can find those resources by going to voting.nyc. David?
Yep, and we'll be repeating it a lot on our newscasts and certainly online. Let me take a moment to thank our guests there. Arva Rice, President and CEO of the New York Urban League. Ebony Carrington, Chief Executive Officer of NYC Health and Hospitals Harlem. Aaliyah Baylor, owner of Make My Cake Bakery and Cafe. And Mr. Sunshine, the smile himself, Adrian Summers, man, we need to see it. Thank you, and keep doing what you're doing. New York Urban League Whitney Young Scholar. Thank you all for this important conversation. We remind you that News 4, along with our partners, will be hosting two debates ahead of the June 22nd primary. First, the Democratic mayoral candidates will square off Wednesday, June 16th at 7 p.m. And the Democrats vying for the job of city controller will debate each other on Sunday, June 20th. This fall, NBC4 and our partners will also host candidates for a general election debate on October 20th. Again, we're still working on preparing for those debates. If you have a question you'd like us to consider, email us at debate@nbcnewyork.com. There you see it. I think you can see we get those questions on, and we'll continue to use them as we put together. We all have a stake in this, but that's all the time we have. Melissa Russo always makes me smarter every time I'm talking to her and sitting with her. So, Melissa, thank you.
Thank you, David. We love you.
All right.
Thanks to everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.